Colin Powell, former U.S. Secretary of State, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, has passed away this morning due to complications from COVID-19. Again, we want to reiterate the fact that he was fully vaccinated, but being 84 years old, could have possibly been high risk. We want to thank the medical staff at Walter Reed National Medical Center, say the family, for their caring treatment of our father, our grandfather, a loving husband, and a great American. This is what the family is saying. Colin Powell, the first black U.S. Secretary of State. His leadership in several Republican administrations helped shape American foreign policy over the years. I mean, really, he's someone who is incomparable to our history, and obviously, though, had enough controversy for a lifetime as well. So Nick Smith is here joining us, a veteran himself.
Yeah. You know, Adrian, I think it's one of those things, it just shocks you, right? And it's hard because I think that his legacy, so much of what General Powell just meant to so many African Americans.
Absolutely.
I'm just very comfortable saying that. He's one of those central figures that many of us who have served, we looked up to. We thought about his service. We think about his service. Our deepest sympathies definitely go out to his family and those who served under his command. But you just think about his place in history, and you think about if, regardless of where your politics may have stood, I think that we can all respect and appreciate his service to country. And I think that we should all just be mindful of moments like this, of the men and women who serve, you know?
Yes, absolutely. And again, some of his decision making was questioned over the course of his time as the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, as Secretary of State. But this is not the time to get into those debates.
Right.
This is a time to honor his life. Obviously, his family grieving, like so many in this country, having had complications with their health due to COVID-19 and this terrible pandemic.
And I think we can also recognize, too, we were talking about his legacy. I think that I can expect that the Bush family will have a lot to say because he was extremely close to not only former President Bush, but he was also extremely close to Condoleezza Rice. There was again, a chemistry and just a sense of camaraderie amongst that administration that worked. And again, there will be the historians to debate his legacy and his role in the policy making. But I think that what we cannot deny is the fact that Colin Powell is definitely a figure of history, a part of the American fabric, and I think that it's a story and a legacy that's worth telling and remembering and honoring.
Yeah, and again, a big surprise to those of us who know and were around when he was part of the administration and actually making decisions that affected not just American history, but world history. Again, a figure that will be in the history books and children will learn more and more about, sadly, passing away at the age of 84. His family certainly rocked by this. I would think that there are a lot of politicians. You mentioned the Bush family and they're closest to him, but I think a lot of people are going to be speaking out today. We'll no doubt hear from President Biden, I'm sure very shortly here, because he was a very important figure, not just in a military sense.
Absolutely.
But for many reasons, including those that you've mentioned, as a role model.
That, Adrian, and we can't ignore that this also falls under the veil of the vaccine and everything that's happening right now, right? Yeah. So this further calls into so many people's minds the fear around the vaccine and not being vaccinated and what vaccination actually means. And, we do know that according to his family that, Mr. Powell was indeed vaccinated, you know. So there will be those who will have questions about that. I know that we'll have an opportunity to speak with medical experts about what all that means as well. Yeah. But there are just so many questions around all of this, and I think many are just reeling from the shock of it all right now.
Right. 84 years old, Colin Powell passing away due to complications from COVID-19. Our Evan Lambert is here right now in Washington, D.C. for more on this story. Evan, good morning again.
Yeah, Adrian, there is no denying that Colin Powell was a huge influence here in Washington. And we know that he was appointed under George W. Bush as Secretary of State in 2001. January 2001 was confirmed unanimously by the Senate. We talk about such the divisive era that we live in politics today, but that is certainly something noteworthy that he was confirmed by the Senate unanimously there. Born in Harlem, New York in 1937, and we know a big portion of his influence on diplomacy as Secretary of State was working toward peace in the Middle East, obviously something that has been extremely a long-term goal of the United States, but you could say that he certainly had his mark in that era as well. And just as we're learning these developments about former Secretary of State Colin Powell's death, and those are just some things to remember about him as we learn this solemn news. Adrian?
And Evan, again, as Nick Smith and I were chatting here in studio, Colin Powell, a figure that history will never forget, and one of the highest ranking, if not the highest ranking African-American in federal government, besides Condoleezza Rice, before the election of President Obama. He was a national security advisor prior to being a chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And then, of course, we know that he was a 4-star general. So certainly a politician, but also a diplomat.
Yes, and Adrian, one of the things, there had been a lot of talk at one point, would he run for office? And that was never a consideration of his. He had always talked about how he and his family thought it best that he not run for, public office. And I think that this speaks to who he was, again, also. I think that he felt his duty was to serve, and he didn't necessarily feel the need to run for and hold an office there. I think that even with the situation with Mr. Powell and again, the administration, that can be debated. And that is, historians will always debate that. I think that, but once again, you just can't deny the fact that he understood his place in history and what he meant to so many. And I think that there are definitely men and women who have served and men and women who have just studied his trajectory through the military who will sit back and say, you know what, this was a moment in history and this person meant a lot to me for this reason. And I just include myself among them.
Well, I mean, and you mentioned you include yourself among them. You served in the Army, correct?
I did Army, yeah. And Adrian, there's just so many different levels to that. And the reason I highlight, honestly, Colin Powell, the time that he went in and served, is a very different military, and we have done reporting of our own on how the military in many ways is a microcosm of the United States, right? Where we're still trying to learn different cultures, different communities, and the military tends to be a spot where you all come together. And guess what, Adrian? It strips away. When you're in that platoon, when you're in that unit, Adrian, nobody cares that you're from Chicago, Illinois, or from Harlem, New York, like Mr. Powell. You're wearing green, you're Army green. We're all serving under the flag of the United States military. Mm-hmm. So to rise to the ranks, to become a commander of Joint Chiefs of Staff, to do what he's done and then serve under the Bush administration, Adrian, it's worth recognizing and tipping your hat, and just literally just taking a moment to recognize his contribution to America.
And obviously he became famous for what he did during a successful Desert Shield and Desert Storm operations. We do know that he was very familiar in experiencing having to come up with a strategy to expel the Iraqi army from Kuwait. Of course, there were a lot of missions that he went on that his name will never be erased from a part of the military combat that we've seen in the Middle East. But interestingly, Colin Powell was also somebody who had to go kind of tiptoe over party lines quite a bit. Of course, serving under a Republican president, but he was actually registered to vote as an independent.
Yeah.
And some of his platform was kind of in the middle, but oftentimes went right or left, depending upon what the topic was.
And Adrian, I think this also goes to speak to what patriotism and service to country is all about. Mm-hmm. I think that there are those who will recognize the fact that, yes, he may have served under a Republican president, but I think at the end of the day, it was his love of country that mattered most. It wasn't about politics. I would like to believe that it wasn't about politics so much as service, that he felt like he could faithfully serve the administration and do what was best, he thought, for Americans and our country serving under that president who happened to be a Republican. I believe that if the policies and ideas aligned with someone with the big D, he would have served under them as well.
Well, I know a lot of people would question whether or not that was true, but I think that for sure this is not the day again to have divisive conversations about someone who is being laid to rest very soon and a family now in mourning. Nick, thank you for your insights, especially as someone who has served in the United States military. We want to go now